The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone square of Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance, painting the ancient fountain in golden hues. Margot Dubois stood before the wooden door of her bistro, her fingers trembling as she turned the brass key for the very first time as owner. The small brass plaque beside the entrance gleamed. Le Petit Jardin, Margot Dubois, propriétaire. After 18 years of working in other people's kitchens, saving every euro, and dreaming of this moment, it felt surreal. The bistro occupied the corner of Place Saint-Michel, a prime location that had once housed a bakery dating back to the 1800s. The building's honey-colored stone walls and terracotta roof tiles spoke of generations of stories, and now it would tell hers. "Maman, you're going to wear out the key if you keep staring at it," Celeste called from across the square, her school bag slung over her shoulder. At 16, Margot's daughter had inherited her mother's sharp wit and an eye for detail that often made her seem older than her years. Margot laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet morning air. "I'm savoring the moment, ma chérie. How many times have I dreamed of this?" "Only about 1,000 times a day for the past 5 years," Celeste replied with a grin, jogging over to plant a kiss on her mother's cheek. "I have to get to school, but I'll be back this afternoon to help with the final preparations. Try not to rearrange the dining room again before I get back." As Celeste disappeared down Rue des Oliviers, Margot pushed open the door and stepped into her sanctuary. The interior was exactly as she had envisioned during those long nights when she would sketch layouts on napkins during her breaks at Le Grand Hotel in Marseille. 8 tables with crisp white linens and small vases of fresh lavender, walls painted in warm cream with copper pots hanging from wrought iron hooks, and windows that caught the morning light perfectly. The kitchen was compact but efficient, designed by someone who understood that great food came from passion, not just space. A professional 6-burner range, a brick oven that would produce perfect bread and gratins, and counters that had been worn smooth by decades of use. This was where she would create magic. Margot tied her apron around her waist and began her morning ritual. First, she ground coffee beans from the local roaster, filling the space with an aroma that spoke of comfort and home. Then she began preparing the ingredients for her opening day menu, a simple selection of dishes that represented her philosophy of cooking. Fresh, local ingredients, prepared with respect for tradition, but touched with her own creative flair. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. She filleted the fish delivered by Monsieur Beaumont from the coast, prepared a ratatouille that would have made her grand-mère proud, and crafted a tarte tatin that had been her signature dish for years. Every movement was practiced, economical, born from years of working in professional kitchens where every second counted. At 11 o'clock, she heard footsteps on the cobblestones outside. Through the window, she watched as curious neighbors began to gather, drawn by the sight of smoke rising from the chimney and the warm light spilling from the windows. Old Madame Rousseau from the flower shop next door pressed her face against the glass, her eyes bright with curiosity. Margot walked to the door and opened it with a flourish. "Bonjour, everyone. Welcome to Le Petit Jardin." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, every table was occupied. Madame Rousseau ordered the soup du jour, a butternut squash velouté with chestnuts. The mayor, Monsieur Lacoste, arrived with his wife and requested her famous coq au vin. Young couples shared plates of her cheese selection, paired with wine from the local vineyard. As the lunch service unfolded, Margot found herself moving between kitchen and dining room with the grace of a dancer. She had always believed that cooking was a form of communication, a way to share love and culture without words. Today, she felt that conversation flowing freely between her and her guests. "Madame Dubois," called Pierre Moreau from table 5. "This tarte tatin is extraordinary. The caramelization is perfect." Margot felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. Pierre was known in the town as a man of few words and discerning taste. His approval meant something. "Merci, Monsieur Moreau. It's my grand-mère's recipe, with a few small improvements." "Small improvements that make all the difference," he replied, taking another bite with the concentration of a connoisseur. As the afternoon wore on, word spread through the town like wildfire. The bistro remained full, with people waiting on the terrace despite the October chill. Margot watched through the kitchen window as neighbors recommended dishes to visitors, as children pressed their faces against the glass, as elderly couples shared dessert with the contentment of those who had found something special. Celeste arrived at 4 o'clock, her eyes wide with amazement. "Maman, there's a line around the corner. Madame Vidal from the tourist office says she's never seen anything like it for an opening day." "I can barely believe it myself," Margot replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "But look at them, Celeste. They're not just eating, they're celebrating. This is what I dreamed of." As the sun began to set, painting the square in shades of amber and rose, the last customers lingered over their coffee and digestives. Margot allowed herself a moment to stand in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. The fountain bubbled softly in the center of the square. Couples strolled hand in hand, and the windows of the surrounding buildings glowed with warm light. But as she scanned the square, her eyes caught something that made her pause. A man in a dark coat stood beneath the plane tree near the fountain, partially hidden in shadow. He seemed to be watching the bistro with unusual intensity. When their eyes met across the distance, he turned away quickly and walked toward the narrow alley that led to the old church. Margot shook her head, dismissing the odd feeling that settled in her stomach. It was probably just curiosity. After all, the bistro had been the talk of the town today. Everyone was curious about the new proprietor and her cooking. Celeste appeared at her elbow. "Who was that man you were watching?" "Just someone enjoying the evening," Margot replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that there had been something calculating in his gaze. The last customers departed near 10 o'clock, leaving behind empty plates and full hearts. Margot and Celeste worked together to clean the kitchen and prepare for tomorrow. As they worked, they talked about the day, the dishes that had been most popular, the customers who had made impressions, the small adjustments they would make for tomorrow's service. "I'm so proud of you, Maman," Celeste said as they wiped down the last table. "You did it. You really did it." Margot pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering aromas of the kitchen. "We did it, ma chérie. This is for both of us, for our future." As they prepared to leave, Margot made one final check of the kitchen, ensuring that everything was secure for the night. The brick oven radiated gentle warmth, the copper pots gleamed in the dim light, and the prep station was ready for tomorrow's service. She was reaching for the light switch when she heard it, the soft scrape of paper being slid under the front door. Margot froze, her hand suspended in midair. At this hour the square was empty, the other businesses closed. "What was that?" Celeste asked, looking up from where she was counting the day's receipts. "Probably just a late advertisement," Margot said, but her voice sounded uncertain even to herself. She walked to the front door and picked up the envelope that lay on the worn wooden floor. Her name was written across the front in block letters, the ink dark and deliberate. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper with a message that made her blood run cold. "Your success won't last long. Some dreams are meant to be nightmares. You should have stayed in Marseille." Margot's hands shook as she read the words again, hoping she had misunderstood. But the message was clear, unmistakable, and filled with a malice that seemed to emanate from the very paper. "Maman, what is it?" Celeste's voice seemed to come from very far away. Margot quickly folded the note and slipped it into her apron pocket. "Nothing important, ma chérie. Just someone's idea of a joke." But as they walked home through the quiet streets of Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance, Margot couldn't shake the image of the man in the dark coat, or the feeling that her perfect day had been marked by something sinister. The cobblestones beneath her feet seemed less friendly now, the shadows between the buildings deeper and more threatening. She had worked too hard and dreamed too long to let anyone destroy what she had built. Whatever this threat meant, whoever had sent it, she would not be intimidated. Le Petit Jardin was her sanctuary, her life's work, and she would protect it with everything she had. But as she kissed Celeste goodnight, and lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of their small apartment above the pharmacy. Margot couldn't silence the voice in her head that whispered, "Some dreams do become nightmares," and perhaps hers was about to begin. The second day at Le Petit Jardin began with rain pattering against the windows, turning the cobblestones of Place Saint-Michel into a mirror that reflected the gray October sky. Margot arrived early, the threatening note from the previous evening weighing heavily in her coat pocket like a stone. She had barely slept, her mind racing between the triumph of opening day and the sinister words that had marred its conclusion. As she unlocked the door, the familiar comfort of her kitchen felt different somehow, less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where she was being watched. She shook off the feeling and began her morning preparations, determined not to let anonymous threats derail her dream. The morning routine helped calm her nerves. She kneaded bread dough with more force than necessary, finding solace in the repetitive motion. The familiar alchemy of flour, water, and yeast transforming under her hands reminded her of who she was, a chef, a creator, someone who built rather than destroyed. But as she worked, fragments of memory surfaced unbidden. 5 years ago, another kitchen, another dream that had turned into a nightmare. She had been younger then, 33, and full of naive optimism when she had partnered with Lucien Rousseau to open La Belle Époque in the old quarter of Marseille. Lucien had been charming, persuasive, full of grand plans about creating the finest restaurant in the city. He had handled the business side while she focused on the kitchen, and for 6 months, everything had seemed perfect. The restaurant had been gaining recognition, food critics had begun to notice, and Margot had allowed herself to believe she was finally on the path to success. Then the creditors had arrived. The memory made her hands falter as she shaped the loaves. She could still see the expression on Lucien's face when she had confronted him about the unpaid bills, the suppliers who were threatening to cut off deliveries, the mounting debts that he had hidden from her. His charm had evaporated like steam from a hot pan, replaced by desperation, and then, finally, abandonment. She had come to work one morning to find a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry, Margot. I can't fix this. The restaurant is yours now, along with everything that comes with it." The everything had included 60,000 euros in debt, angry suppliers, and a reputation tainted by association. She had been forced to close La Belle Époque within a week, selling everything to pay off what she could. The dream had become a nightmare that had taken her years to recover from, both financially and emotionally. "Maman, you're going to need that dough to death." Margot looked up to find Celeste standing in the doorway, her school uniform damp from the rain. Her daughter's voice carried the concern that had become too familiar over the past 5 years, the worry of a child who had watched her mother pick up the pieces of a shattered dream. "I'm just making sure it's perfect," Margot said, forcing a smile. "The bread is the foundation of everything else." Celeste approached the counter, her eyes studying her mother's face with the perception that made Margot sometimes forget she was only 16. "You didn't sleep well, did you? You have that look you get when you're worried about money." "I'm not worried about money, ma chérie. Yesterday was a success. You saw that yourself." Margot shaped the dough into neat loaves, her movements becoming more controlled. "I'm just adjusting to being the owner instead of the employee." "Is it about that note you got last night? The one you said was a joke?" Margot's hands stilled. She had underestimated her daughter's observational skills. "What makes you think there was anything significant about it?" "Because you folded it very carefully before putting it in your pocket, and you kept touching your pocket all the way home. Plus, you only call things jokes when they're not funny at all." There were times when Margot wondered if Celeste was too perceptive for her own good. It was just someone who probably isn't happy about the competition. When you're successful, there are always people who want to bring you down, like Lucien did? The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Margot had tried to shield Celeste from the worst of what had happened with La Belle Époque, but her daughter had been 11 then, old enough to understand that their lives had changed dramatically and that they had been forced to move from their comfortable apartment to the small flat above the pharmacy. "Lucien was different," Margot said carefully. He was weak, not malicious. He ran away from his problems instead of facing them. And you think this person is malicious? Before Margot could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Pierre Moreau entered, shaking raindrops from his coat. Despite the early hour, he was dressed in his typical careful manner, pressed shirt, wool sweater, shoes that had been polished despite the weather. "Bonjour, mesdames," he said, nodding to both of them. "I hope I'm not too early for coffee." "Never too early for a good customer," Margot replied, grateful for the interruption. "The usual?" "S'il vous plaît. And perhaps a croissant, if you have them fresh." As Margot prepared Pierre's order, she found herself studying him more carefully. She knew he was a detective with the local police, though she had never learned exactly what kind of cases he handled. He was a regular at most of the cafes in town, always observing, always listening. There was something comforting about his presence, a sense of quiet authority that made her feel safer. "Beautiful morning," Pierre said conversationally, though they could all hear the rain against the windows. "If you like rain," Celeste replied with a smile. "I have to get to school. Au revoir, maman, Monsieur Moreau." After Celeste left, Pierre settled at his usual table by the window, but instead of opening his newspaper as he typically did, he watched Margot work. She felt his eyes on her as she moved between the kitchen and the dining room, preparing for the day's service. "You seem preoccupied this morning," he said quietly. Margot paused in her polishing of wine glasses. "Opening a restaurant is stressful. There are always concerns." "Of course. But yesterday you seemed to be celebrating a dream come true. Today, you look like someone who's discovered that dreams can have complications." There was something in his tone that made Margot look at him more carefully. Pierre's expression was neutral, but his eyes held the kind of professional interest that came from years of reading people's concerns. "Monsieur Moreau, what exactly is it that you do for the police?" "I investigate things that don't fit normal patterns. Frauds, threats, situations where people might be in danger without realizing it." He took a sip of his coffee. "Sometimes I notice when someone who was happy yesterday is worried today." Margot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. "You think I'm in danger?" "I think you're concerned about something specific, and I think you're the type of person who would try to handle it alone rather than ask for help." Before she could respond, the door opened again. This time, it was Henri Blanchard, a man she recognized but had never spoken to directly. He was in his 50s, well dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the casual atmosphere of Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance. His presence changed the energy in the room immediately. "Madame Dubois," Henri said, approaching the counter with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "I wanted to congratulate you on yesterday's opening. Quite impressive." "Merci, Monsieur Blanchard. Would you like a table?" "Actually, I was hoping we could speak privately. I have a business proposition that might interest you." Margot glanced at Pierre, who had looked up from his coffee with sharp attention. "I'm sorry, but I need to prepare for the lunch service. Perhaps another time?" "Of course. But I think you'll find my offer very generous. This location, it has potential beyond what you might imagine." Henri smiled, but there was something calculated in his expression. "I represent a group of investors who are very interested in developing this part of the old town. Your bistro, charming as it is, could be part of something much larger." "I'm not interested in selling," Margot said firmly. "I just opened yesterday." "Everyone has their price, Madame Dubois. And sometimes circumstances change in ways we don't expect." Henri's smile never wavered, but his words carried an undertone that made Margot's skin crawl. "I'll be in touch soon with specific numbers." "I think you'll find them quite persuasive." After Henri left, the bistro felt smaller, more confined. Margot realized she had been holding her breath. "Interesting timing," Pierre said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Henri Blanchard showing up the day after your opening, talking about circumstances changing. It's almost as if he knows something is going to happen that might make you more amenable to selling. Margot's hand went instinctively to her pocket, where the threatening note still rested. You think he sent the note? I think Henri Blanchard is a man who gets what he wants, and he's not always particular about his methods. Has he approached you before? Never. I didn't even know he knew my name. Pierre finished his coffee and stood up. Margot. May I call you Margot? I think you should be careful. And I think you should consider that whatever made you worry this morning might be connected to Henri's sudden interest in your property. He left money on the table and walked toward the door. If you need anything at all, you have my number. Don't hesitate to call. After he left, Margot stood alone in her bistro, surrounded by the careful preparations she had made for another day of realizing her dream. But the joy of yesterday felt very far away now, replaced by the growing certainty that someone was determined to destroy what she had built. She pulled out the threatening note and read it again. Your success won't last long. Some dreams are meant to be nightmares. You should have stayed in Marseille. The reference to Marseille couldn't be coincidental. Someone knew about La Belle Époque, about Lucien, about the failure that had nearly destroyed her. But who? And why now, when she had finally found the courage to try again? The rain continued to fall against the windows, and for the first time since opening Le Petit Jardin, Margot felt truly alone. She had built this dream on the foundation of her determination to never again be vulnerable to someone else's weakness or malice. But as she looked around her beautiful bistro, she realized that having something precious also meant having something that could be taken away. The lunch service would begin in 2 hours. Customers would come expecting the warmth and comfort they had found yesterday. She would give them that, would continue to build her dream one meal at a time. But she would also be watching the shadows, waiting for the next move in a game she didn't understand but was apparently already playing. The third day at Le Petit Jardin began with an unsettling silence. Celeste stood outside the bistro at 7:30 in the morning, her breath visible in the crisp October air, trying to understand why the windows were dark and the door remained locked. Her mother was never late. Punctuality was as much a part of Margot's character as her perfectionism in the kitchen. "Maman?" Celeste called, pressing her face against the glass. The dining room was exactly as they had left it the night before. Chairs upturned on tables, everything clean and ready for the morning service. But there was no sign of the early preparations that usually began before dawn. A knot of anxiety formed in Celeste's stomach. She pulled out her phone and dialed her mother's number, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Maman, it's me. Where are you? The bistro is still locked and you're not answering. Call me back, please." She tried the apartment above the pharmacy next, climbing the narrow stairs and knocking on the door. "Madame Dubois?" called Monsieur Patel from the pharmacy below. "She left very early this morning, before 5, I think. I heard her footsteps on the stairs." But if Margot had left for the bistro at 5, she should have been there when Celeste arrived. The walk from the apartment to Place Saint-Michel took exactly 7 minutes. Celeste had timed it countless times during their evening walks home. 20 minutes later, Celeste found herself standing outside the police station on Rue de la République, her hands shaking as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The desk sergeant looked up from his paperwork with the patient expression of someone accustomed to dealing with the town's minor crises. "I need to speak with Detective Moreau," Celeste said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My mother is missing." Pierre emerged from his office within minutes, his expression immediately serious when he saw Celeste's face. "Tell me what happened." "She didn't come home last night. I thought she might have stayed late at the bistro, but this morning it was still locked. Monsieur Patel said she left the apartment before 5, but she never opened the restaurant." The words tumbled out in a rush. "She always calls if she's going to be late, always." Pierre grabbed his coat from the back of his chair. "Show me." They walked quickly through the quiet streets, past the bakery where Monsieur Fournier was already arranging the morning's bread, past the small shops beginning to stir with the day's first customers. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal to Celeste, as if the world should have stopped moving when her mother disappeared. At the bistro, Pierre examined the locked door with the methodical attention of someone trained to notice details. "You said she left the apartment at 5? That's what Monsieur Patel heard. She's done that before. She likes to have everything perfect before opening. So she goes in early to prepare." Pierre walked around the building, checking the alley behind the kitchen and the small courtyard where Margot had planned to place tables for outdoor dining in warmer weather. No signs of forced entry. Her keys? She always keeps them with her. She's very careful about security. Celeste paused, remembering something. There was something else. The past 2 nights she's been different. Worried about something, but she wouldn't tell me what. Different how? Checking the locks twice, looking out the windows, jumping when the phone rang. And there was a note the first night, after opening day. She said it was a joke, but I could tell it wasn't. Pierre's expression darkened. What kind of note? I don't know. She wouldn't show me. But after she read it, she got that look she had after what happened in Marseille. Like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Tell me about Marseille. As they walked back toward the police station, Celeste found herself recounting the story she had pieced together over the years. The partnership with Lucienne, the restaurant that had seemed like a dream come true, the debts and deception that had destroyed everything. She blames herself for trusting him, for not seeing the signs. It took her years to save enough to try again. And now someone is threatening her just as she's found success again. Pierre was quiet for a moment. Celeste, I want you to think carefully. Has your mother mentioned anyone from her past recently? Anyone who might have followed her from Marseille? No, but... Celeste stopped walking. Henri Blanchard came to see her yesterday. He wanted to buy the bistro. She said no, but he seemed very confident that she would change her mind. What exactly did he say? Something about circumstances changing in ways we don't expect. It was creepy the way he said it. Like he knew something was going to happen. Pierre's face had gone very still. We need to move quickly. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that felt both urgent and frustratingly slow. Pierre coordinated with the regional police, putting out an alert for Margot's car, a small blue Citroën that she had bought used 3 years ago. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen her that morning. Celeste found herself in the strange position of being both the most important witness and the most helpless person in the investigation. She answered the same questions repeatedly. What time did her mother usually leave for work? Had she seemed worried about anything specific? Were there any places she might have gone? She wouldn't just leave, Celeste insisted for the 5th time. Not without telling me, and not without opening the bistro. She's worked too hard for this to just walk away. By afternoon, Pierre had uncovered information that made the situation even more ominous. Henri Blanchard's business practices were well known to law enforcement, though he had never been successfully prosecuted. He specialized in acquiring properties in historic districts, often using pressure tactics that walked carefully along the edge of legality. He's been buying up properties around Place Saint-Michel for the past year, Pierre explained to Celeste as they sat in his office. Building by building, always at prices well below market value. The owners who sell always seem to have compelling reasons. Financial troubles, family emergencies, anonymous threats. You think he took her? I think Henri Blanchard is a man who doesn't like to be told no. And I think the timing of his visit yesterday, combined with your mother's disappearance, is too much of a coincidence. But when they went to question Henri, they found only his secretary, who explained that Monsieur Blanchard had left that morning for a business trip to Lyon. He'll be back next week, she said with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to deflecting questions. Meanwhile, the investigation had uncovered another disturbing possibility. Lucien Rousseau had been spotted in the region 2 weeks earlier, asking questions about Margot at restaurants in nearby towns. The man who had betrayed her trust and destroyed her first dream had somehow learned about her second chance. Why would he come back now? Celeste asked. It's been 5 years. Men like Lucien never really disappear, Pierre said grimly. They just wait for opportunities. If he's in financial trouble again, he might see your mother's success as a solution to his problems. As evening approached, Celeste stood in the empty bistro, surrounded by the dreams her mother had worked so hard to build. The dining room that had been full of laughter and conversation just 2 days ago now felt like a mausoleum. The kitchen, where Margot had moved with such confidence and joy, seemed to echo with her absence. Pierre had assigned an officer to stay with Celeste, but she barely noticed his presence. Her mind was racing through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Her mother could be anywhere, locked in a basement, driven to some remote location, or worse. The phone rang at 9 o'clock, cutting through the silence like a blade. Celeste lunged for it, her hands shaking as she answered. Celeste? The voice was weak, barely recognizable, but it was definitely her mother. Maman, where are you? Are you hurt? I don't know where I am. Listen to me carefully, ma chérie. Don't trust anyone. Not Henri, not... The line went dead. Celeste stared at the phone, her heart pounding. Her mother was alive, but she was clearly in danger. The brief call had been enough to confirm their worst fears. Margot had been taken against her will. Pierre arrived within minutes, bringing with him a team of technicians who began tracing the call. It came from a cell phone, he explained. We're trying to triangulate the location, but it was very brief. She said not to trust Henri, Celeste said. She started to say something else, but the line went dead. Not to trust Henri or not to trust anyone. There's a difference. As they waited for the technical analysis, Pierre made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to bring in Lucien Rousseau for questioning. If he's in the area, we need to know why. But when they arrived at the small hotel where Lucien had been staying, they found his room empty. According to the desk clerk, he had checked out that morning, paying in cash and leaving no forwarding address. 2 suspects, both conveniently unavailable, Pierre muttered. This is starting to look like a coordinated effort. Celeste barely heard him. She was thinking about her mother's voice, the fear and exhaustion she had heard in those few precious seconds. Margot was somewhere in the darkness, probably cold and frightened, possibly hurt. And the people who had taken her were still out there, still making their plans. The bistro felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a crime scene. The dreams that had filled these rooms just days ago had been replaced by a nightmare that was all too real. But as Celeste looked around at the careful preparations, the evidence of her mother's passion and determination, she felt something harder than fear settling in her chest. Her mother had fought back from failure once before. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, had found the courage to dream again. Now it was Celeste's turn to fight, not just for her mother's life, but for the future they had planned to build together. The investigation was just beginning, but Celeste already knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let her mother's dreams die in the darkness. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would find Margot and bring her home. The abandoned farmhouse sat like a broken tooth against the purple sky of dawn, its roof tiles missing in patches and its shutters hanging at odd angles. Margot had been awake for hours, her wrists raw from the rope that bound her to the wooden chair, her mind working through every detail of her captivity with the methodical precision she usually reserved for menu planning. She was being held in what had once been a kitchen, though the old range was cold and the copper pots that hung from hooks were green with verdigris. Through a cracked window, she could see olive groves stretching toward distant hills, but the landscape gave her no clue about her location. She could be anywhere in Provence, anywhere within 100 kilometers of Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance. Her captors had been careless in some ways, careful in others. They had taken her phone but left her watch, allowing her to track the passage of time. 36 hours since she had been grabbed in the alley behind her bistro, chloroform burning her lungs as consciousness fled. 36 hours of fear and rage and desperate planning. The man who seemed to be in charge called himself Mark, though she doubted it was his real name. He was lean and nervous, with the kind of intensity that suggested he was in over his head. His partner, a broader man with scarred hands, said little but watched her with the patience of someone accustomed to violence. "Your friend should be here soon," Mark said, entering the kitchen with a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing for days. "Then we can finish this business and everyone can go home." "What friend?" Margot asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The one who's been very eager to see you again. He says you have unfinished business from Marseille, Lucien." The name sat in her stomach like a stone. After 5 years of silence, he had come back to destroy her life again. But this time, she wouldn't be caught off guard by his charm or his lies. "How much is he paying you?" she asked Mark. "Enough to make this worthwhile, plus a little extra from the businessman who wants your property." So Henri was involved too. The confirmation of what she had suspected made her feel sick, but it also clarified her situation. She wasn't just dealing with Lucien's desperation. She was caught between two predators who had found it convenient to work together. "They're using you," she said. "When this is over, do you really think they'll let you go free? You're witnesses to a kidnapping." Mark's expression flickered with uncertainty, but before he could respond, they heard the sound of a car approaching on the gravel road. Through the window, Margot watched a familiar silver BMW pull up to the farmhouse. Her heart hammered as she recognized the figure that emerged from the driver's seat. Lucien looked older, his hair grayer and his face marked by lines that spoke of stress and poor decisions. But his smile was the same, the charming, persuasive expression that had once made her believe he could make all their dreams come true. "Bonjour, Margot," he said as he entered the kitchen. "You look well. Success suits you." "What do you want, Lucien?" "What I've always wanted. A chance to make things right between us." He pulled up a chair and sat facing her, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne he still wore despite his obvious financial troubles. "I made mistakes in Marseille. I know that, but I've learned from them." "You learned to kidnap people?" "I learned that sometimes drastic measures are necessary to get someone's attention." His voice carried the reasonable tone she remembered from their business meetings, the one that made his most outrageous suggestions sound logical. "I tried to contact you the conventional way, but you've made yourself very hard to find. I had good reasons for that." "I'm sure you did. But Margot, we were good together. The restaurant failed because of circumstances beyond our control, not because we weren't a good team." The audacity of the lie took her breath away. "Circumstances beyond our control? You stole money from the business accounts. You borrowed against the equipment without telling me. You made deals with suppliers that left us owing money we didn't have. I was trying to keep us afloat. The economy was terrible. The competition was fierce." "You were gambling," Margot said flatly. "Every euro you took from the business went to pay your debts to the casinos. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Lucien's charm slipped for a moment, revealing the desperation beneath. "I had a system. I would have won it all back if I'd had just a little more time. And now you're in the same situation again. How much do you owe this time?" "That's not important. What's important is that I can make this right. We can be partners again, Margot. Your bistro is successful. I can help you expand, turn it into something bigger. By kidnapping me. By getting your attention. By making you understand that we're better together than apart." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with the fervor of someone who believed his own lies. "Henri Blanchard has offered us a fortune for your property. We can take that money, find a new location, build something amazing. Henri is working with you. Henri is a businessman who sees opportunity. He needs your building for his development project, and he's willing to pay well for it." "Very well." Margot felt the pieces clicking into place. "So you make the threats, scare me into selling, and you split the profit with Henri. What happens to me after that?" You come with me to the south of France. I have investors there who are interested in backing a new restaurant. More lies. The words came out harder than she intended. You haven't changed at all, Lucien. You're still the same man who runs away when things get difficult. His face darkened. I'm trying to help you, Margot. I'm trying to save you from making the same mistakes I made. The only mistake I made was trusting you the first time. Lucien stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. You're being stubborn, unreasonable, but you'll come around. You always do when you've had time to think. He left the kitchen, and Margot heard him talking in low voices with Mark and the other man outside. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the tension in their voices. Whatever they had planned, it wasn't going according to schedule. Meanwhile, 50 kilometers away in Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance, Pierre was coordinating the largest search operation the region had seen in years. The discovery of Margot's car, abandoned in a rest area outside Aix-en-Provence, had confirmed that she had been taken against her will, but it had also expanded the search area exponentially. We have roadblocks on all major routes, he explained to Celeste as they stood in the incident room that had been set up in the police station. Her phone last pinged a tower near Manosque, but that was yesterday evening. They could be anywhere by now. Celeste studied the map on the wall, marked with red pins indicating possible locations. She called me from somewhere rural. I could hear wind in the background, maybe birds. It sounded peaceful, which doesn't make sense if she's being held against her will. It makes sense if they're holding her somewhere isolated, a farmhouse maybe, or an abandoned building away from populated areas. Pierre had also been working another angle. Financial records showed that Henri Blanchard had made several large cash withdrawals in the past week, and security cameras had captured him meeting with two men who matched the description of known criminals from Marseille. We have enough evidence to arrest Henri when he returns from Lyon, Pierre said. But we need to find your mother first. What about Lucien? Any trace of him? His credit cards haven't been used since he checked out of the hotel. Either he's paying cash for everything, or someone else is funding his operation. As if summoned by their conversation, Pierre's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, he heard a voice that made his blood run cold. Detective Moreau? This is Lucien Rousseau. I believe you've been looking for me. Where is Margot Dubois? Safe, for now, but her safety depends on your cooperation. I want to make a deal. Pierre motioned for Celeste to stay quiet while he activated the recording equipment. What kind of deal? I want immunity from prosecution in exchange for information about Henri Blanchard's operations. The man is a criminal, detective. He's been terrorizing property owners throughout the region, using methods that would shock you. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. And what about kidnapping? That's a crime too. Margot isn't being harmed. She's simply being convinced to see reason about a business transaction. Let me talk to her. There was a pause. Then Margot's voice came on the line. Pierre? Are you hurt? No, but... The line went dead. Pierre immediately contacted the technical team to trace the call, but he already knew it wouldn't be enough. Lucien was too smart to stay on the line long enough for a precise location. But they had learned something important. Lucien was getting desperate, which meant he was more likely to make mistakes, and his offer to provide information about Henri suggested that their partnership was already showing strain. We need to find them before dark, Pierre said. If they decide to move her again, we might lose them entirely. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Madame Rousseau, the elderly woman who ran the flower shop next to the bistro, remembered something that had been bothering her for days. There was a van parked in the alley behind the bistro the night before Margot disappeared, she told Pierre. It had writing on the side, something about olives or olive oil. A search of commercial vehicle registrations revealed 3 companies in the region that fit the description. The second one they checked, a small olive oil producer whose business had failed 2 years earlier, still owned a van but had reported it stolen the previous week. They're using a stolen vehicle, Pierre realized. and they're probably hiding somewhere connected to the olive oil business. The abandoned farmhouse was the third location they searched. As Pierre's team surrounded the building, he could see smoke rising from the chimney and a silver BMW parked beside the old barn. They had found their target, but as they prepared to move in, Pierre heard the sound of another engine starting. Through his binoculars, he could see movement in the farmhouse. Someone was preparing to leave. "They're moving her," he said into his radio. "All units, we're going in now." The next few minutes would determine whether Margot Dubois would live to see her bistro again, or whether her dreams would die in the shadow of the olive groves. The sound of car doors slamming and urgent voices carried through the cracked walls of the farmhouse like a dinner bell announcing salvation. Margot's heart leaped as she recognized Pierre's voice among the shouted commands, but her relief was tempered by the immediate danger of her situation. Mark burst into the kitchen, his face flushed with panic. "They found us. We have to go. Now." "How many?" Lucien's voice came from the doorway, tight with fear, but still trying to maintain control. "Too many. The place is surrounded." Margot watched the interplay between her captors with the sharp attention of a chef monitoring multiple dishes at once. Mark was clearly ready to cut his losses and run, but Lucien was calculating, looking for an angle that might still salvage his plan. "We use her as leverage," Lucien said finally. "They won't risk her safety." "This wasn't part of the deal," Mark protested. "You said it would be simple. Grab her, get the signature, collect the money. Nobody mentioned shootouts with the police." "Plans change. Adapt or fail. That's business." But Margot could see the cracks in Lucien's confidence. His hands were shaking as he pulled out a cell phone, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool October air. This was the same man who had abandoned her when the pressure mounted in Marseille, and she could see history preparing to repeat itself. "You're going to run again, aren't you?" she said quietly. Lucien's eyes snapped to her. "What?" "It's what you do when things get complicated. You make grand plans, convince other people to take risks with you, and then you disappear when the consequences arrive." "Shut up. Mark, you should know. He's already planning to abandon you. He's done it before." Mark looked between them, uncertainty flickering across his face. "What's she talking about?" "Nothing. She's trying to cause trouble." "I'm trying to save your life," Margot said to Mark. "He's going to use you as a distraction while he escapes, just like he used me in Marseille." Outside, Pierre's voice came through a megaphone. "This is Detective Moreau. We have the building surrounded. Release Margot Dubois and come out with your hands visible." "They know your name," Margot observed to Lucien. "They know about Henri too, don't they? You're not negotiating from a position of strength. You're trapped." Lucien's mask of control finally slipped completely. "I said shut up!" He grabbed her chair and dragged it toward the back of the kitchen, away from the windows. "You don't understand what you've cost me. 5 years of planning, of waiting for the right opportunity. 5 years of gambling and losing," Margot interrupted. "How much do you owe now?" "More than you owed when you destroyed our restaurant." 200,000 euros, he said, the number coming out like a confession. "But this deal with Henri would have cleared everything. We could have started fresh. By stealing my life's work. By taking what should have been ours in the first place." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of wood splintering. Mark cursed and moved to the window, peering through the shutters. "They're breaking down the front door. We need to get to the van." "What about her?" Lucien gestured toward Margot. "Leave her. She's just going to slow us down." But as Mark moved toward the back door, Margot saw her chance. "Mark, wait. There's something you need to know about the money." He paused, looking back at her. "There is no money. Henri Blanchard never intended to pay you. He was using Lucien to get my property, and Lucien was using you to do his dirty work. When this is over, you'll be the only one who goes to prison." "She's lying," Lucien said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then why hasn't Henry paid you anything yet? Why are you still waiting for money that was supposed to be guaranteed?" Mark's face went very still. He said the payment would come after the property transfer was complete. And you believed him? A man who makes his living intimidating property owners? Enough! Lucien pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light from the window. We're leaving. Now. But Mark didn't move. You son of a bitch. You've been lying to me from the beginning. I've been trying to make us all rich. If you'd just... Mark's fist connected with Lucien's jaw before he could finish the sentence. The knife clattered to the floor as Lucien staggered backward, and suddenly the kitchen erupted in chaos. Margot threw herself sideways, chair and all, as the two men grappled. Her shoulder hit the stone floor hard, but the impact loosened the ropes that had been binding her wrists. She worked frantically to free herself as Mark and Lucien crashed into the old cooking range. The back door burst open just as she pulled her hands free. Pierre appeared in the doorway, his weapon drawn, taking in the scene with professional calm. "Police! Nobody move!" Mark immediately raised his hands, but Lucien dove for the knife on the floor. Pierre's shot echoed through the kitchen, and Lucien screamed as the bullet shattered his wrist. "Game over," Pierre said quietly. 20 minutes later, Margot sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a cup of coffee warming her hands. The paramedics had pronounced her physically unharmed, but she could feel the emotional toll of the past 48 hours settling into her bones like winter cold. Celeste appeared at her side, tears streaming down her face. "Maman, I was so scared, I thought—" "I know, ma chérie." Margot pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "But I'm here. I'm safe." Pierre approached them, his expression a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. "We have both men in custody. Mark is cooperating fully. He's provided detailed information about Henri Blanchard's operations. We should be able to make arrests throughout the region. And Lucien? He's going to hospital first, then to prison. He'll be charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. This time he won't be able to run away." Margot nodded, surprised by how little satisfaction she felt. 5 years ago, she would have wanted revenge against the man who had destroyed her dreams. Now she just felt tired and eager to get back to the life she had built. "What about my bistro?" she asked. "Still there, still yours. Though I suspect you'll have more customers than ever once word gets out about what happened." The drive back to Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance took them through the countryside that had become so familiar during Margot's years of recovery. The olive groves and vineyards stretched toward the horizon, the same landscapes that had provided peace and inspiration as she planned her comeback. Today they looked different, not just beautiful, but conquered. As they entered the town, Margot was amazed to see crowds gathered in Place Saint-Michel. Word of her rescue had spread quickly, and it seemed like half the town had turned out to welcome her home. She saw familiar faces, customers from the bistro, neighbors, shopkeepers who had become part of her daily routine. "Look at that," Celeste said, pointing to the bistro. The windows were blazing with warm light, and through the glass, Margot could see that the dining room was full. Someone had organized an impromptu celebration, and the community that had embraced her bistro was now embracing her return. "Who's cooking?" Margot asked, suddenly panicked at the thought of strangers in her kitchen. "Madame Vidal from the hotel and a few other local chefs," Pierre explained. "They wanted to keep the dream alive while you were gone." As they walked through the crowd, Margot was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. People she barely knew hugged her. Customers shared stories of how much the bistro had meant to them in its brief existence, and several local business owners offered help with security and repairs. "This is what Lucien never understood," she said to Celeste, as they stood in the doorway of Le Petit Jardin. "He thought success was about taking from others, but it's really about giving to your community." Inside the bistro, the atmosphere was magical. The tables were full of people sharing food and stories. The kitchen hummed with activity, and the air was filled with the laughter and conversation that Margot had dreamed of creating. This was her vision made real, not just a restaurant but a gathering place where people could connect over good food and shared experiences. As the evening wore on, the crowd gradually thinned, but the core group of supporters remained. They helped clean the kitchen, reset the tables for the next day's service, and restore the bistro to its usual perfect condition. "Tomorrow," Margot announced to the assembled group, "we reopen officially. And I want to add something new to the menu, a dish called Freedom Soup, made with ingredients that represent the strength of community." The applause was immediate and heartfelt. Later, as Margot and Celeste walked home through the quiet streets, they passed the fountain in the center of Place Saint-Michel. The water sparkled in the moonlight, and the ancient stones seemed to whisper stories of all the dreams that had been realized and defended in this place. "Are you going to be okay?" Celeste asked. "I mean, really okay?" Margot considered the question seriously. The trauma of the kidnapping would fade, but the lesson would remain. She had learned that success could make you a target, that dreams were worth fighting for, and that the community you build around your vision could be your greatest source of strength. "I'm going to be better than okay," she said finally. "I'm going to be exactly what I always dreamed of being, a chef who creates not just food, but memories. A woman who builds something beautiful and refuses to let anyone take it away." They paused at the door to their apartment, looking back at the bistro one last time. The windows were dark now, but tomorrow they would blaze with light again. Tomorrow the ovens would be hot. The dining room would fill with laughter, and the dream that had survived kidnapping and betrayal would continue to grow. "Maman," Celeste said softly, "I think Grand-mère would be proud of you." Margot smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. "I think she would be proud of both of us, ma chérie. We survived the nightmare, and now we get to live the dream." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, the town of Saint-Émilion-sur-Durance settled into peaceful sleep around them. But in the kitchen of Le Petit Jardin, the pilot light burned steadily, ready to ignite the flames that would cook tomorrow's meals and warm tomorrow's hearts. The Bistro of Dreams had become something more than Margot had ever imagined. It had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of community, and proof that some dreams are strong enough to survive any nightmare. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the cobblestones of Place Saint-Michel, those dreams would begin again, one perfect dish at a time.